And someone just asked how to find it, so I had to let them know we just went live. All right, cool. So we are live now. Should be going both to Facebook and LinkedIn, although first time doing both broadcasts to each place, so I may learn something. But anyways, so this is our kind of inaugural session of Courageous Conversations. This is a project I'm going to be doing a lot during 2021 here. And basically the reason this exists, because I realized that people are not comfortable or not able or not willing having difficult conversations with each other, which means when I talk about political things, I only talk about them with people on the political left. And we get in this echo chamber where we only see things from our point of view. And the only interaction we have people from the right is we see like news headlines and memes, and we get this idea in our mind of what those people are like, and it's truly appalling. And we just stay in this echo chamber, right? And the same thing happens, right? I'm sure, Jeremy, you mostly talk politics with people on the political right half of the spectrum. And
of course,
your exposure to the left is through memes about the left, or sometimes memes the left posts. Like, so what ends up happening, I've noticed, is that we do this sort of, I referred to it in my post this morning, this sort of shadow boxing, where I denounce things I hear from the political right, and I argue against the things I hear from the political right, and I build cases against what the political right is saying, but I'm not actually building those arguments against what people on the right actually think, feel, and believe. I'm building my arguments against what I think people on the right think, feel, and believe. And oftentimes those things aren't the same thing, right? And of course, I give plenty of examples of that happening in the reverse, right? I'll watch a video by some right-wing person tearing apart liberals' ideology, and I'm sitting there going, no one on the left believes this stuff. What are you talking about, right? And I realized the reason that happens, again, is because we're so separated, right? We don't interact with each other to figure out for real what we actually believe. So Jeremy supports Donald Trump. I do not like Donald Trump. We'll keep it polite. And that's not going to change. At the end of this conversation, he's still going to support Donald Trump, and I'm still going to hate Donald Trump. But what I want to happen through this conversation is a couple of things. First off, I want to have a realistic idea of what Jeremy actually thinks. So when I'm making arguments against Jeremy's viewpoint, I can make arguments against his real viewpoint, not the imagined viewpoint. And I also want to get to the point that where, though we will both disagree with each other, we'll be able to more easily see the other one's humanity, respect the other one, and really understand where the other one's coming from, right? Jeremy, I want you to be able to think in your head at the end of this, okay, John's still wrong. He's still an idiot, but I can see where he got to that conclusion. I can see why he feels like I don't. Right? And I want to have the same thing about you. I want to be able to say, this Jeremy guy is clueless, but I understand how he got there. And he's wrong, but I know why he feels the way he feels. So we can, again, at least coexist, even though we disagree with each other. So that's the goal of the session. I've never done it before. We'll see how it goes. Jeremy, thank you for being, game for this.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for having me, and thank you for putting this on. I think it's a important thing for people to be able to not only watch, but if people can take something from this, to have the same kind of conversations with friends, family members, even people they just met, just to show some kind of humanity, to have love for each other, and to be able to share with each other without getting overly aggressive and all these things we see even on the media every day, when people are talking to each other from two different extremes. They're fighting on TV. So that's the only examples we have is the constant fighting and bickering and arguing. And to get to a point where we can just not agree with each other, but to see how somebody got to that viewpoint and arrived at that viewpoint. If we can just understand that, then that opens a case for dialogue at least. So again, thank you for having me, and thank you for putting this on, and I'm excited about it.
So something that I've shared with Jeremy in advance, that I'm going to share with the audience as well, because it'd be really useful if any of you guys, want to try your hand at a difficult conversation like this, right? Keep in mind at the time of recording this, Thanksgiving's 2-3 weeks away, Christmas is around the corner. Even in the COVID world, I'm sure there'll be opportunities for awkward conversations with relatives, politics. So some, I guess, kind of ground rules here that both me and Jeremy are going to follow by. It's important that we express how we really feel, right? If I hear Jeremy say something that I find appalling or wrong or confusing, I'm not just going to move right along. I'm going to simmer there for a bit and kind of express myself. But that can be challenging, because a lot of times when you hear people say things, the only thing that's running through your mind is, are you a fucking moron?
Right.
And that's not the best thing to say. So some language tools we're going to use here is when we're crafting our sentences, we're going to do our best to express things in I terms rather than you terms. Yeah. So for example, rather than saying you're an idiot, or rather than saying that idea is ridiculous, you say that bothers me, or that confuses me, or I'm not following, that doesn't make sense to me, or even that seems idiotic to me. That's still a statement about yourself, not a statement about their opinion or about them. So that's one tool we're going to use. Another related tool that you sometimes have to use when the other person just truly flabbergasts you is you have to use expression, the story I'm making up in my head. Because sometimes, despite your best efforts, there's no nice way to say what you have to say and have it still be accurate. So you preface it with, all right, the story I'm making up in my head is you're clueless, you're biased, you're sheltered, you're an idiot. Where am I going wrong, right? And it gives you a certain amount of latitude to, within reason, state your mind, even though your mind might not necessarily be kind or positive, without it directly attacking the person. Because again, it's still about you. It's about the story you're making up in your head. And it frees the other person up to kind of correct the story where you went wrong and provide you an alternative story. And they can share the story that's in their head. And you guys can compare each other's stories and work on progress that way. So you'll probably hear us do both those things. And again, I was thinking of just, having this conversation just with Jeremy, but I figured anyone who wants to engage in these conversations could benefit from those tools as well.
Definitely.
And the final bit of prep we're going to do is Jeremy and I really don't know each other. We connected on Facebook over the summer. We had the small list of chats over Facebook Messenger. I've seen one or two of his posts. He's seen one or two of mine, but we really are strangers. And what makes online engagement so difficult is when someone's a stranger to you, the only experience you have of them comes from their words. And if you don't like their words, you quickly spin a whole picture of them as a terrible person based on that small interaction, right?
Right.
And a lot of times, the very first idea that comes to your mind to explain their behavior is the one that you settle on as the real explanation of who they are. And that's dangerous. One of the most dangerous things we as human beings can ever do is dehumanize our opposition. You look at all the worst things mankind's ever done to us, each other, the low points of history, the stains on our human history, they're almost all caused by dehumanizing the opposition.
Yep.
And that includes, from my perspective, when you're on the left and you're entirely correct in what you're saying and your opposition is on the political right and they're a total dirtbag, from my perspective, right?
Right.
I still have to follow that same rule of not dehumanizing the opposition, right? And again, when Jeremy sees some libtards online, he has to follow the same rule of not dehumanizing the opposition. So before we even get started, partially to help us out because we don't know each other, but also partially as a good best practice for everyone watching, we're going to humanize each other for a little bit. So Jeremy, just briefly, can you tell me a story about something that happened between you and your kids recently?
Yeah. So I play an online video game from time to time called World of Warcraft, and I've been playing it for a pretty long time, since early on into my marriage. My wife actually introduced me to it, and it's a fun game. And recently I was sitting there playing, and my daughter, Savannah, who is 4 years old, she'll be 5 in April. Time's flying by, but she came up to me and, Daddy, can I sit on your lap and watch you play the game? And I thought, okay, yeah, sure. So I got her up there, and I'm sitting there playing, and she wanted to start playing. She grabbed the mouse from me, and she wanted to see how she could move the guy, and just the imagination in her eyes, the pure awe of, wow, I can make this thing move on here. I'm doing that. And my wife was just sitting there in the background, giggling, watching us, and saying how beautiful of a little picture it was to just sit there and watch us two having fun and bonding over something that originally me and my wife had bonded over when she first showed me it. So that was a neat experience to have as a father, to have your daughter just sitting there in your lap and enjoying something that you enjoy doing, and getting that same kind of awe feeling and just wow factor. So yeah, that was a neat thing.
That's cool. So I guess my story, this is something that's kind of repeated itself a few times recently. My daughter is like a typical 5-year-old when it comes to her diet. She doesn't eat anything like spaghetti or Fruit Loops, right? Terrible diet. Don't know how we got here. We're trying desperately to get her to eat healthy foods, right?
Yeah.
And the only success I've had recently is getting her to eat avocados of all things, which, in my perspective, are the grossest things in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine from 5-year-old's perspective are gross too. And the way I got her to do that is by first I ate it and I made all, because I hate avocados too. And I made
Mm-hmm.
all sorts of funny faces of like disgust while I was eating this avocado.
Right.
She got to film me on camera and like rewatch the video of me eating the avocado and see how funny I was. And then I offered
Mm-hmm.
the same with her. I said, how about you eat it, make funny faces, and I'll take a video of you. And she thought that was hilarious. So sure enough, she ate an avocado, like 4 solid slices of avocado, while I videotaped her and took like 8 different little 1-minute videos of her eating this thing. And each time she watched it and be like, oh, ha, ha, look at that. And she thought it was the
Right.
coolest thing ever. So this is a fairly regular thing for us now. We'll get an avocado, be like, hey, honey, you want to do an avocado? And I'll eat a bit, and she'll videotape me hating the experience, and then she'll eat some. It's actually, I'm going to save some of those videos, right? Because I'm sure it'll be fun to look back on.
Right. Oh yeah.
5-year-old her, and then 26-year-old me just
together. And that's such a neat way to think about it, to actually get them to try something new that they haven't tried. Because yeah, you said it, kids they have the weirdest, craziest diets. Then how can you exist on just Fruit Loops and this?
Yeah. All right. Second part is humanization exercise. We'll both just pay each other a compliment, even if they don't know each other well. So Jeremy, one thing that I respect about you is that this will be probably a future session of courageous conversations we'll go into later, but you've actually kind of changed your position when it comes to race relations, racism, etc. And that's a hard thing to change your mind about, because that's one of those big, important topics about life. Most people have their viewpoint for years and years, and it's hard to admit that you had been wrong and hard to, come across. And you changed your mind, which shows you're an open-minded individual, and then you're willing to admit you changed your mind, which takes some strength too. So that's something I admire about you.
Well, thank you. Something that I've noticed about you throughout reading some of your posts and engaging with you a little bit here and there is that when you set your mind on something and you get a goal in mind, is you're going to achieve it. You're going to move forward, push forward through whatever to get it done. And a perfect example of that is having this conversation here. As we talked about it, starting with back a few months ago, and the original one was going to be about race, which we might have in a future conversation. But political dynamics changed. Look at the season we're in right now, but we still you push forward to get this done, and here we are now. And so I really think that's a great thing for you, especially me being on the right, looking at somebody on the left, and you getting it done and saying, no matter if we disagree, we're gonna do this. We're gonna have this hard, maybe difficult conversation, but we're gonna get it done. And so you having the motivation to just go out and do that, I think that's a great quality in life, and I can admire that about you.
Cool. So this may have been a bit of a drawn out version, but I would suggest anyone who's going to engage with difficult dialogue mentally go through the same process of humanizing the other person, identifying something you like or respect about them. And even if you don't know them at all, you can at least imagine, right, this person having a family, having a partner, having friends, because something interesting happens when you've humanized somebody. When they say something that you think is idiotic, your very first assumption about that person is they must be an idiot. But when you humanize someone and respect someone, your brain says, hold on, let's see if there's any other explanations first, right? So, now that I've had this experience with Jeremy is saying something, I'm sure, in this call, and I'll think, wow, this guy must be a jackass who lacks empathy. Now that I've humanized him a bit, I'll have to tell my brain, you know what? Let's hold off on that and see if we can find another explanation, right? And just that small second between your very first theory about a person and maybe theory round 2 is really important. And that's what I see not happening online, right?
Right.
You see an online comment, they create a theory about this person in their mind, and they just go with it, right? Without exploring, is there any other explanation here? So that's why we did that exercise. Again, it's a bit drawn out, right? In real life, this would be 30 seconds in your mind. But I highly recommend, whether it's online or in person, you go through a similar exercise of humanizing your opposition.
I would say especially online too, because a lot of the times when we engage online, we're not sitting there going to the person's profile and clicking through their pictures and seeing who they are and seeing that they might have this big beautiful family that they're supporting and taking care of behind all of that political commentary that you might be in an argument about. So especially online when you're engaging, it's good to keep that in mind, to just let the humanity flow through.
Yep. Cool. So first difficult question here. Has Trump had a positive or negative impact on the country? My answer is negative, as you could assume. I can assume your answer, but what's your answer? He's had a positive or negative impact on the country.
I would actually say a little bit of both. I'd lean more towards positive. I think there has been a few negatives, especially in terms of division in the country. I think that divides have increased under him, but my thinking in that perspective is that he isn't fully responsible for that. I think part of that is people and their ideologies, especially standing in opposition. Such opposition to him has created this big divide. So I think that's where the negative effects tend to come from, but mostly I believe a positive effect on the country.
What are some of those positive impacts from your perspective? How do you see the country being better off?
Well, judging from when he first stepped into office to where we are now, I can say that a few things that have changed. Number one would be the tax cuts that directly affected me. I'm on disability currently, but when I was working before I got on disability, I seen an increase to my take home pay. After they implemented that, I was roughly bringing in about $1,800 to $2,000 more a year. And on the reverse end of that, I was actually getting more back in taxes during tax time. I would get a bigger refund as well. So not only was I taking home more, but I was getting a bigger refund. And by that impact on me, it helped me to give my child a better life. So that was one huge thing when he stepped in and took office and did that. Another thing was getting rid of the Affordable Care Act, getting rid of the mandate, the individual mandate on it. That had a direct impact on me as well, because I didn't always carry health insurance. Even when I was working, I didn't want it through my job, didn't want to carry it. I had to pay some steep fines for that in the past under the Affordable Care Act, and it cost a lot of money to pay those fines. But it would have even cost me more to have health insurance, especially at the old job I was at. So when he got rid of that, that lessened the burden on me significantly in terms of paying those fines. I ended up getting health insurance through the new job that I had gotten because it was substantially cheaper. I think that's just because I was working in a medical field. So their insurance was great to begin with because it was at a hospital. So I don't think that Trump played a part in lowering or raising healthcare costs for me personally there. But not having to pay that and choosing to be able to not carry health insurance and not having to pay for that choice was a great thing in my mind. And then one other thing was the overall unemployment. Let's say before COVID had struck, the unemployment was doing great. Now, I know that isn't all on him. I know that that's even picking up from the Obama administration and where they left off, because the unemployment numbers were on a downward trend the last few years of the Obama administration. So I think Trump kind of took the reins and picked up where he left off. But I think you've seen a sharp decrease from 2016 to, say, the last quarter of 2019. the unemployment rate was great, especially here in Montana. We even had a Democratic governor that was in charge and everything, but and even here it was great. No complaints there. The unemployment rate was just awesome. So
Yeah.
I would say that that's a few things I could name that I really think that he affected the country in a positive way there.
I don't know much about the, tax changes. Is it your perspective that the tax changes were better for everyone in the country, or did you just happen to be in some of the lucky few that benefited from those tax changes?
I'm the same way. I haven't read enough on it and understand it enough to know exactly how many people it affected, but I know that I would be considered lower middle class. I'm not completely middle class. Just
Mhm.
to be fair, my take home pay when I was working after taxes was about $35,000 a year that I was making. And in Montana, with housing costs and everything, that's on the lower end of the middle class spectrum. And so most of the people that I know, work with, hang out with, conversate with, were in that same range, somewhere between anywhere from 20 to 60,000 take home pay. And
Yeah.
I know that almost all of them, it had a direct impact on them for the positive. Um, I can't say for people who maybe they're working part time only and making 10 or 15,000 a year, and maybe they're part time college student or something. I don't know how that affected them, and I also don't know how it affected the middle to upper middle class and then the wealthy. I have uh, heard things that it was a huge tax break for the wealthy, huge tax break for corporations. I don't know. I can't say. It might have been for corporations, because I do know that, and I don't think it was a coincidence, when they actually passed it into law and passed the tax cuts, within, I would say, 2 to 3 weeks after that, the company that I had been working for gave everybody a bonus. And this is a company that employed 1,400 employees in the small state of Montana, where we're barely at 1 million people. In the city I live in, we're topping maybe 50,000 people in population, and that's the capital city. So the place I was working for gave out a bonus of, I think it was, um, gosh, I want to say it was around $800 to $1,000, somewhere around there, and that's to every single one of their employees, whether they were part time or full time. So them being able to do that and have that extra cost, I
Yep.
think they probably benefited in some way, and then they were able to do that because it wasn't during a holiday season or anything like that. It was just, here you go, here's a bonus incentive because you're working here.
Yeah. It's interesting. I heard from a highly reliable meme I saw on Facebook one time, that the deficit spending just goes up and up, right? Every president,
Mm-hmm.
spending goes up and up,
Yeah.
but the Trump presidency took that, like, 5 presidents forward, right? The amount that
Yeah.
went up during the Trump presidency, and there wasn't even like a war you could blame it on, like there was when Bush, right? The deficit went up under Bush.
Right.
Um, I don't know if that's true or not, right? Someone have to
Mm-hmm.
fact check that. But in your mind, would that be okay? Tax cuts for the wealthy, tax cuts for the lower middle class, possibly tax cuts for other people, and the expense was increasing the deficit. Is that a fair trade? Is that okay? Is that a good move? Is that a bad move?
I personally, I don't think so. I'm pretty conservative in my spending,
Mhm.
when it comes to my family here. So I don't, if I see something, even if it's on sale for a great price, if I see something like that, I'm not going to jump the gun and say, okay, I'm going to buy it. I
Sure.
need to weigh my options, take a step back, think, do I really need this? What's the benefits? What's the drawbacks? And I would think and hope that, especially when you're the leader of a country, when you're the president, you're in the highest office there is, and you're basically the dad that's in charge of a family of 300 plus million people.
Right.
That's the way that I look at it. And so I would hope and pray that somebody wouldn't just jump the gun and, oh yeah, spend, spend, spend. So in my mind, no, I don't think that the benefits of a tax cut equal the amount of spending. If that's true, I can say that I haven't really looked into that much as well, but I can see the pure numbers. Deficit increase, we've had a huge deficit increase, trillions. And so when I see that, I think, maybe they could have not cut it as much. I look at things like that, say maybe a less substantial cut where people still benefit a little bit, but it's not putting us more and more in debt. So if that was the case, and it did, I don't think it really benefits it. Because if I'm taking home $2,000 more a year, but the country itself leaves everybody $4,000 more in debt per year, the numbers don't add up then.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, I think one of the things that makes this conversation difficult is I think for any person to have a really rock solid political opinion, they have to spend 3 hours a day researching things, and ain't nobody got time for that.
Yeah.
The story I'm making in my head, right,
Mm-hmm.
based on obviously minimal data, is that Trump is just so concerned with his approval rating and so concerned with having power and popularity that he was willing to, steal from future generations of Americans in the form of giving tax cuts that we really couldn't afford to give, just to increase his popularity, because he doesn't care what happens 20 years from now when the shit hits the fan.
Mm-hmm.
That's the story I'm making in my head, right?
Right. Yeah. And I can definitely see that point and sympathize with that, especially having a daughter. I'm looking at her future and how she's going to grow up, and I don't want her growing up in a country where this debt is weighed down more and more on her shoulders. So I can definitely see that. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that he was so concerned about popularity, and my reasoning there would simply be this: is that before he ever decided to run for president or anything like that, he was probably one of the most popular guys in America. I mean, he was starring in rap videos. He was in the Home Alone movie, all kinds of little cameos here and there. Rappers would sing songs about being as rich as Donald Trump, and he basically had somebody's dream life. If you're dreaming that way, where you want wealth and you want power and you want people to love you. I mean, every talk show imaginable, everything like that. I think before he entered the political spectrum, he was a really popular guy. Now, I think in some way that he has a huge ego because of that, and because of growing up where he did in New York. I know my mom's from the East Coast. Her whole family, everybody was in New Jersey and New York. My grandpa was originally born and raised in the Bronx. So my family knows the Trump family. They know the history there. They know growing up how brash of an individual him and his brothers were, or his brother and his sister were. But I think the popularity there, I don't know if I can agree that it was based on popularity. You might have a point there. It could be. I know the guy has a big ego. That's one thing that I really disagree with him on, even though I support him. I don't like the ego part of it. And that's me speaking as somebody who's not just a conservative, but is a solid Christian also. I don't think ego needs to play a part in it. And I think that's one thing where he's gone in the wrong direction way too many times to count as the ego. But I'm not sure if that played a part in the tax cut. It could be. And so if that's the way you feel, then definitely more power to you. I'm not going to cut you down on that, because I honestly don't know. I don't know Trump personally enough to know if he would do that or not. So that's we can only speculate.
Well, we'll move on from Trump's motivations because we go down that rabbit hole for eternity. There's
Hmm.
something else where I sense that maybe there's some differences in values here. Maybe there's not. You mentioned that a lot of jobs in Montana, pre-COVID, obviously, that was getting better. And again, I don't know this for a fact, but let's just kind of
Hmm.
adopt a fictional scenario. The reason there's more jobs in Montana is because Trump appointed oil lobbyists to be in charge of the EPA and stuff
Hmm.
like that. So regulations got lifted, companies
Right.
would start doing things they weren't ever allowed to do before. And because of
Hmm.
that, they got healthier bottom lines, they got more business, they need to bring on more help. Basically, he just took restrictions off and let people go crazy, do whatever they want to the environment, just go chase that profit, boys. And that
Right.
created the effect of more jobs. If that's the case, and we don't
Hmm.
know, but if that's the case, would that be okay with you? Would that be not okay with you? I mean, where would you stand if that was the reality?
Well, I would say this about it. Again, most of the stuff that I will comment on and opinions that I have, I would preface it by saying it fits in a Christian worldview opinion, at least in my personal mind and
Sure.
my experiences. I know that not everybody that calls themselves a Christian agrees in a wide range of topics. But I would identify as a Christian, as a conservative Christian, and so in that, God gives us this creation, this earth. I think we need to take care of it. We need to respect it. We need to use it wisely. Um, just as if you gave a gift to your daughter and she just destroyed it,
Yeah.
that would break your heart. I know as a father, it's especially if it's a gift that they've been really needing and looking forward to, and it's just this great gift, and then they just go and destroy it. You're gonna feel like, wow, they didn't really care. So no, I don't think that's okay. I don't think it's okay to just destroy the planet for profit. That's a pure profit mindset. Whether it's going to create more jobs, whether it's going to give us more income, anything like that, I don't think is right. But I will say, on the other side of it, especially talking in terms of Montana, we had more coal strip plants shut down. We had coal strip 1, 2, and 3, and those plants have been shut down. I can't comment too much on the terms of what those impacts were on the environment. I know they say clean coal and that it was a pretty clean operation up there, but because we had a Democratic governor here, but we have a Republican president, they're at odds a lot of times. Steve
Sure.
Bullock, he actually ended up running for president, and then he just recently ran for Senate because his governor term was up. But in that, he put a lot of regulations in that shut a lot of those things down at the same time when Trump was lifting so many regulations. So in Montana itself, I don't know if that had as much of an impact as other states that might have had a Republican governor,
Mhm.
Republican controlled everything, and they'll just go right along with the cuts and the deregulations. So, but I would say in a pure sense that no, it wouldn't be okay to say, whatever with the environment just to get a profit or more jobs.
So I'm actually finding a surprising amount of alignment in our values, which is making me wonder how we came to such different conclusions.
Mm-hmm.
So let me tell you my perspective. You can share yours. So
Right.
when I hear news of Trump putting an oil lobbyist in charge of the APA, when
Mm-hmm.
Trump lifting regulation, stuff like that, to me, that is exactly what we both agreed is not okay. To me, what that
Right.
represents is fuck the environment. I'm going to squeeze as hard as I can to get as much profit out. It'll be the next generation's problem what they're going to do with this mangled carcass of
Mm-hmm.
the environment left behind. So when I hear news of Trump doing that, that's what's happening.
Right.
But maybe when you hear news of that happening, you're not interpreting it as what I just described, right?
Mm-hmm.
I guess
Uh,
when you hear Trump doing things like that, what's your interpretation of what's going on there?
well, my interpretation would be twofold. Is I would say that partially I do actually agree with you on that. That some of the things that go through my mind if I see an appointment like that is wow, he's not caring as much about the environment and he's just political profit. But on the other side, I'm also looking at it as um, Trump has been in business for a very, very long time. There is numerous number of staffs and advisors and so many people around that presidency that I don't think any president in history, except for maybe the very earliest ones like Washington and stuff, who really didn't have much of a cabinet, if at all. But our presidents that have this huge cabinet around them, I don't think they can necessarily take credit for any good or bad that happens just alone, because there's so much decision making and so many opinions that go into it. So when I look at that, I think the numerous checks and the numerous people that it had to go through in order to get that appointment. So I think that so many people weighing on such a topic like that, my hope would be that they were picking them from more than just, oh, we're going to get a yes man in there that's just going to go with us and destroy the environment. I would hope that part of the decision making process is this the best fit for the job? Is this the best person in our mind to get this job done? So that's my twofold analogy there is,
Mhm.
I think on one hand, when you have somebody that's in big oil and stuff in charge of environmental things, a red flag goes up for most people, I would think.
Sure.
But at the same time, when my red flag goes up, I say, wait a second, well, it's a the president is a businessman. He has a lot of businessmen around him. And I think that even though profit might be a concern, I think that other things are a concern as well. And I don't think that when you get down to it, I don't think anybody wants the environment to just implode, or that would leave us with nothing to live on. I mean, everybody wants to live the longest life possible. So I know that if you go bad air, bad water, bad planet, the planet's going to die and we're not going to have a home. So I would hope they would keep that in mind.
It's interesting. Yeah, it seemed like you're willing to give, the Trump administration a little more grace than I am, right? You're willing to go
Yeah.
second layer of explanations of maybe there's a better way to look at this.
Hmm.
I'm very happy to take the first way of looking at it and just stop there. So that's
Right.
the difference. Um, Interesting. Now here's a kind of a question for you that every regulation that's put in place has a
Hmm.
benefit for tomorrow and a cost today, right?
Right.
Um, in your mind, again, this is a total gut feeling thing. I get it. Neither one of us has data on this, but
Hmm.
if you think of all the regulations that are out there, do you feel what portion of those regulations do you think that trade-off makes sense and it's a good regulation to have? What we get
Hmm.
tomorrow is only worth what we pay today? And what percentage of regulations do you think maybe don't make sense, where we're only getting a small benefit tomorrow and it's a huge cost today and it really shouldn't be there? Again,
Right.
gut check. What's your impression of regulations?
Well, I would say that first, I think that I don't have, hard data. We both don't have hard data and looked into this incredibly long, but I know that they've cut a bunch of regulations. I mean, that for every 4 regulations that are cut, there's one new one, I think. So it's, I mean, backtracking massively, and regulation after regulation have been cut. Um,
Recently
and,
or long-term story?
over the last 4 years that
Okay.
he's
Yeah.
been president, I know that a bunch of regulations have been cut. So in that aspect, when I'm looking at that and seeing these massive cuts, um, I'm sitting here not seeing that much effect right away, like a short term versus a long term. So I can sit here and say maybe it was for the short term gain, because we can't see 20 or 30 years into the future, 100 or 200 years into the future, to see what those lasting effects, what they're going to leave for our children and grandchildren. I would hope that they would take that into consideration. I personally believe that they would, but I don't know for sure. I know that some of the regulations, the benefits are massive. Like here in Montana, for instance, we have crazy forest fires sometimes. I know that California is still in the middle of all that. Now, I know that all the regulations that we've put up with the past 4 to 8 years here in Montana, specifically for deforestation and logging and things like that, have just been, they've been massive in terms of locking people up and not letting them have a job to go in there and get forestry done and cutting things down. And it's burned. It's burned and burned. And we've had huge wildfires, massive. And so when I look at that and I look at all the regulations that are on that, I feel like if we cut some of those back and let these people that spend their whole lives knowing about forestry, knowing about logging, and we have these people in control and power saying, well, you can do this, but you can't do that. And they maybe read a book and have some people advising them for 20 or 30 minutes in a meeting. I think that we need to sit there and listen more to the people that are doing it for a living and are out there every day and experiencing it. The firefighters, the loggers, all of those people. So, but in terms of regulations, I think that I think that the long-term benefits are substantial as well for deregulating a lot of things, especially forestry, because that's what I can speak on, what I see with my own eyes and what I know. I think.
So you feel like a lot of regulations are made by politicians who don't know what the F they're talking about, and therefore
Right.
aren't necessarily beneficial.
I would say half and half. Yeah, I would say that again. Most politicians, even smaller politicians, I think they have some kind of cabinet around them, some kind of people and advisors to them. So I think that the people advising them could very well have huge knowledge about it. But at the end of the day, I think the politicians are the ones making those decisions, and they might have never worked a day in their life in that industry that they're trying to regulate or deregulate. But I think that most regulations would be put up by people that don't really have a clue in it.
It's interesting. So, coming into this conversation, my general vague theory about environmental stuff in the left and the right is that the left was very, very happy prioritizing the future generation's needs and deprioritizing this generation's needs. And the right was reversed. The right was very focused on taking care of this generation, saying, hey, they can figure it out, right? They'll take care of themselves when the time comes. And that was my explanation. And, that could be the case for many people, but it seems like in this conversation, we actually, in most ways, share that common value of taking care of the earth, being good stewards of the earth, right?
Definitely.
As a gift God gave us. A lot of our difference maybe comes in, how much we trust the politicians in charge of regulations, how much we trust the regulations that are in place to be correct regulations. Because when I imagine the process, right, I imagine the process of regulations comes from people on the front lines, not necessarily the loggers, but particularly like the DEC workers, right? People, you gotta understand, loggers, while they know forests well, they are focused on profit, right? That's their job.
Right.
I picture people like the DEC whose job it is to maintain. They're the source of the regulation. They then pass it up the chain. It then gets passed up the chain to politicians, and the politicians put it in place. That's my vision of how these regulations happen, which means, in my worldview, the majority of regulations originated from people who know best, and we should therefore trust them.
Right.
In your worldview, a lot of regulations didn't originate from people who know best. They originate from people who are clueless, and therefore we shouldn't necessarily love these regulations so much.
Right. I think that, and I can see your point on that. That's kind of what I was talking about in terms of having a cabinet or having advisors around them. I think that some of those advisors would probably be from groups like that and places like that where the people actually know what they're talking about. I mean, if I wanted to create a brand new drug to try to cure HIV, the first people that I would seek out to advise me on are doctors that have been working their whole lives in that field. And I would hope that senators and congressmen and the president and anyone like that who's setting types of regulations, I would hope that they would seek out that same kind of advisement. The people that are on the front lines, that have been doing it their whole life, that know the most about that certain area of expertise. I can't say that's always what happens, but I would hope that they would do that. I think if I was in that position, that's what I would be doing. But unfortunately, when you look at Washington, I think that some of the things that you might see going on and say, wow, that's just idiotic. Why are they doing that? Or some of the things that I look at and say, how could they be doing that in this day and age? We look at that and we can say, well, not everybody is picking the right advisors, probably. So I think then that it's up to personal opinion in a way. But I would say that I look at long-term health of the earth, because I have a daughter and I want her to have kids, and I want her kids to have kids, and to be able to grow and sustain the earth. So that's the way that I look at it.
It's interesting. Going back to, the appointment of, I don't know, whoever it was, Robert Mueller, or whatever the oil lobbyist was. One of the things about the difference is you more or less trusted the advisors and the process surrounding the president there to make a good choice, when I didn't trust the advisor of the process at all.
Right.
And now here we are with regulations, and I more or less trust the advisors and the process behind the politicians. You have a lot more skepticism around the advisors who are advising the politicians. The process.
Right.
So our real area of disagreement comes down to an area that neither of us actually knows. We just have this impression of how we think things work, right?
Yep.
Which is very interesting. Huh. All right. One last topic I think we'll cover before we wrap up here. This election and Trump's reaction to losing, and everything that's going on with, the integrity of the election being called into question, et cetera. What's your perspective on that? I want to see, how much we align, how much we differ there.
This I would assume would probably be our biggest part of disagreement here, because I will come right out and say it. I do feel like the election in part is being stolen from him. I know that I have some liberal friends that are as liberal as you, maybe more liberal than you, especially that I went to high school with, because I grew up in California, and I have a lot of friends that are extremely left leaning, and they will outright just say, "Man, you're an idiot. We're still friends, but you're an idiot." I think that the election in part was stolen from him, and I base that on a lot of videos that have been messaged to me and shared with me so far, from different counties and different states during the elections. I've seen a video of a guy sitting there, and he's a ballot counter. He's being filmed. I don't know if he knows he's being filmed, but he was being filmed, and he would come to ballots that were marked as Donald Trump. He'd flip it off, and then he'd throw it in the trash next to him. And numerous times, just keep doing that. And my mind was blown. And that was in one county, I think in Wisconsin. Then another one was where they were boarding up windows in I think it was in Detroit, in Michigan, where they were counting a lot of the ballots. There was supposed to be poll watchers brought in to observe, and these people were boarding up all the windows with cardboard and with plywood, so that nobody could see and nobody could film. They wouldn't give any media access. And I thought, if this election is about integrity, and if people are being honest and upfront when they're counting ballots, why would there be any need to hide anything? But why would there be a need to board up any windows? I mean, I get about sharing personal data, and privacy is so important to people. You might not want captured on camera a name on a ballot of a person that somebody voted for, but I know in my state on my ballot, it doesn't have my name on it at all. It just has my votes, and that's what's registered. So I don't think privacy is that big of a deal when it comes to just counting votes and having that observed. So I'm wondering why they're trying so hard to block those observations. And then another one that a video that I gotten that has been deleted off of Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, wherever you go, you can't find it anymore. It was sent to me. One of my friends had saved it, thankfully, so they have it on their phone saved. But it was live, a poll worker counting votes, and they had a huge stack of empty ballots by them. They take a ballot, put it on the table, stamp it as certified that they've received it through the mail, and then the filming shows them filling it in for all the Democrats down the line, and then putting it in the stack to be counted and tabulated. And so to me, all those video evidences, all those things that are being called into question, the thing about, for instance, Pennsylvania being able to count the votes as long as they were postmarked on election day, even if they receive it a week late or something. I know I had to vote by mail. I did it. I voted early. I know a lot of Republicans in the state did as well. And we took care of it. We sent it in on time, or we dropped it off because we knew how important it was. So when you take all those things into consideration, I think that things need to be looked into. And I really don't see Joe Biden as a clear winner right now because it's still contested. I think that Al Gore was given his day in court. We can all disagree or agree with the outcome of what happened there between Gore and Bush. But in the end, Gore at least got his day in court, and there wasn't a clear winner for 30 some odd days. I think that this process needs to play out, and that Trump and Biden both need to be said there's no declared winner yet, and that we need more time, and we need to let whoever wants their day in court to have their day in court, if the need be. That's my view on it.
So let's get clear on priorities and values too. How do you weigh the relative importance of the outcome of the election versus the integrity of the election, right? What relative weight each of those carry?
So outcome of election, honestly, even though I'm a Trump supporter, the outcome of the election is not really that important to me at all. And I know you might be surprised to hear me say that. Most of my friends might be surprised, but I'll tell you why. I believe that whether good or bad, rulers are appointed by God. I think that we play a part in it by voting, by putting them into office. You can go as far back as the Roman Empire, and even earlier than that. People are put into a position of power, and they're chosen by the majority of the people, usually. In that, I believe that God has his hand in everything, this whole earth, or else he wouldn't be God. That's my viewpoint on God, is that he's that powerful. He's this all powerful. So he has his hand in everything. So if the elections are determined by God, then I could sit here, and whoever gets into office, I don't have to worry, because I know that ultimately it's in God's hands. Whether we get Joe Biden or Donald Trump or Joe Jorgensen or Kanye West in the office, I don't think it really affects me all that much, because I know that my life, my protection, the protection of my family, all my values are wrapped up in God's hands. And if I try to practice what I preach, then I need to show that in my everyday life, that even though I might be bothered or irked thinking, somebody's not getting justice here, whether it's somebody on the left saying Joe Biden isn't getting justice, he needs to be totally 100% declared the president. These people just need to give him a break and let him go. Or whether it's somebody on the right saying this election was stolen and Trump needs justice. No matter what, I think in the end, God receives his justice. And we're all his children. We're all in his hand. And so I don't think election results play as much of a part in our life as we're led to believe or as we like to think sometimes. I think our votes matter because it's part of the democracy. It's part of what makes America great is having the freedom to vote, that everybody has a right to go out and do that. Some countries, they don't have that. They have a king, they have a ruler, and that's all they have. They have a dictatorship. They don't ever get to have that freedom. So that's a great thing about America. But in the end, whoever's president, Christ is king. And that's my take on it. But the integrity of the election, I think that's the more important topic. It is the votes that we have the freedom to cast. Are they being counted? Are they really being counted? Are there ones being counted that shouldn't be counted? Are there fake votes out there, fraudulent votes? Are we having claims that there's fake or fraudulent votes when there aren't really any? We can look at it from both sides and say the integrity is of the utmost importance, because I look at honesty as a huge, huge, big characteristic with people. And honesty, integrity is most important to me. So I would say in the election, it's the same thing.
So we 100% share that value. So I'm the same boat, right? This election matters. To me, it doesn't, right? I'm the last person going to be affected by a bad Trump presidency, but there's a lot of people out there who are a little bit more, vulnerable than I am to change the presidency. It matters. However, the integrity of the election is what matters most to me, because once the American people lose faith in the election process, then people stop participating, because why bother? It's all a sham anyways. They stop voting, which means suddenly politicians, it becomes a lot easier to control who gets in power, who does get in power. It shifts the outcome of an election even more than it already is, away from the people and into the hands of the elite and, shenanigans. So I'm totally with you. The integrity of the election is the most important thing in every election, more than any outcome. If we lose the integrity of elections, the decline of our country just drops off really quickly. So I'm totally aligned with you there. I guess maybe the difference, right, is that, what we accept as true and false, right?
Right.
Because, well, two differences. So one's really important. I haven't seen any of the videos you mentioned. This is a really difficult thing in politics, because the Facebook algorithm serves us both what we like seeing. So you see and what I see are very different. I haven't seen any of the videos you've talked about, and you probably haven't seen half of the videos I've watched, which is why we have these vastly different opinions. And that's a real problem,
Right. Yeah.
I would love to see your videos, and you should see my videos. What I've seen, right? And again, I'm not an expert on this, but just a little bit I've seen, it seems like there is no credible evidence that any of this is actually happening. It's all just words out of Trump's mouth, and every single judge Trump goes to, it gets thrown away right away for a lack of evidence. And Trump keeps coming out with bigger and bigger claims about what's going on. And if any of those claims were real, I would be on the street protesting with, you guys. But so far, no credible evidence. Now, I understand there are some times that you can do wrongdoing and there is no evidence of it. That does happen. But in general, if it's something that's massive across the whole country and widespread in this digital age where everything is tracked digitally, generally, if it's something big, there's going to be record of it somewhere. And if there's no record of it somewhere, then it sounds like Trump's just a sorry loser. Again, my interpretation. But it seems like we might just be different in who we trust, right?
Yeah, I think that's part of what it comes down to is, when I look at Trump, I see his faults, I see his humanity, that he's a man, and let's get down to it. In my Christian worldview, he's a sinner just like me. He's an imperfect person. But I look at him as somebody that generally I can trust. And when I say that, you probably gag. Your first reaction is, you can trust what? I think that's the biggest difference, and that's the biggest difference for most people, is this a person you can trust or a person you can't trust? I think it boils down to the things that he's said and then what he does. And I think more times than not in the last 4 years, speaking for me personally, is the things that he campaigned on. And I'll premise this by saying this, and this might surprise a lot of people too. I did not vote for Trump in 2016. Um, I didn't vote for Trump and I didn't vote for Hillary. I voted third party with my conscience, and I voted for Darrell Castle, who was running for the Constitution Party. I felt very good and solid in my vote because I didn't trust Trump. Um, I couldn't vote for Hillary. The number one reason being the issue of abortion. I'm an abortion abolitionist, so I can't vote for anybody who supports it in any way, shape, or form. That's just me personally. And then when it came to Trump, I didn't trust him in 2016. I thought he was a liar. I thought he was this New York buffoon who just said what everybody liked to hear, but wouldn't follow up on any of it. So I voted in 2016 third party, but these last 4 years, the reason he earned my vote this time is because I looked at what he campaigned on in 2016 and before, and that what he's done to try to get all those things done since then. And I feel that the majority of what he said that he would do, or try to do at least, whether you agree with it or not, I mean, you know, people have their different opinions on what he wanted to accomplish, and that's why they would vote for him or not. But I think the majority of what he set out to do, he did do. That he accomplished, or at least tried to accomplish. It might have been blocked, but tried to accomplish. So that's why I see him as trustworthy. But a lot of my friends, probably including you, would think the exact opposite, that he is the least trustworthy person you could possibly know. So
I agree with 2016, Jeremy.
mm-hmm.
I think what's obvious here is you and I are obviously consuming very different news sources, right? I can
Mm-hmm.
think of millions of different memes and articles and images documenting all the ways Trump has lied and gone back on his word. And you can think
Right.
of plenty of examples and ways he's stuck to his word. And I can't
Mm-hmm.
think of any of your examples, and you probably can't think of any of mine. So here's
Right.
the effect of the media we consume, right? And how we perceive things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is interesting. Because yeah, I absolutely see Donald Trump as, I mean, depending what you mean by trust, right? I trust him to act according to character, and what I trust him to do
Right.
is serve his own best interests and screw people over. That's
Mm-hmm.
my perspective. Here's a question. We talked about integrity of elections being really important, right? And we
Right.
should share that common value. How do
Mm-hmm.
you feel about Trump's call to stop counting votes at like midnight on November 3rd? Not talking about ones that were too late. I'm talking about ones that were already submitted, were already sitting there in stacks and piles. They just hadn't had time to process them yet. And
Right.
his pursuit of legal action to stop those votes being counted. How do you perceive that?
So that one bothers me a little bit because, like I said, every vote should matter. It's a free country. It's where we're free to cast our vote, cast our ballot, and let our voices be heard. So calls to not let a vote be counted if it was received there when it was supposed to be there. For instance, my vote, I dropped it off days before the election.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't count it until election day. They had it sit there and they counted on election day. If my vote was sitting there in a stack and it was going to be one of the last ones counted for some reason, and Trump tried to stop that, I would be angry because that's my vote sitting there and it should count because I did what I was supposed to do. I turned it in before the deadline, and for it to not count all of a sudden, that would hurt. So I think that, um, in that, if it was just that, if it was just I don't want these votes counted after midnight, then I think that would be wrong. But I also think that when he's saying that, he might he might be saying the wrong thing when he's trying to come across as meaning something else. And I'm just speculating because, again, I don't know the man personally. I don't know him enough to know anything like this, but I think what he's meaning, especially for Philadelphia and Pennsylvania in general, is the mail-in votes that were still coming in. If those are received anytime after, then that's when they shouldn't be counted. They absolutely should be counted if they got there on time and they're sitting there waiting to be counted, as long as they are legal votes. Because, and like you said, you haven't seen any evidence of this, and I have, but I probably haven't seen evidence of things that you know or have seen, and you have. But from what I've seen and from what I've heard, is there were votes that were sitting there in stacks that were there on the deadline that weren't real votes, that were from people that have been dead for years and years, that have been sent in, and they were just in the mix and things like that. So if that is true, I'm not saying it is, but if it was to be true, I don't think those votes should be counted, because they're not real. But yes, every vote that is sitting there that is 100% legal, that was cast by a person that is alive and kicking and saying, I got my vote in when I was supposed to, absolutely 100% they should be counted. And if all those votes are counted and it winds up being Joe Biden as president, then Joe Biden is my president for the next 4 years. And I'm fine and comfortable with saying that, because, again, Christ is on the throne and I trust in God. So
if January 20th rolls around, right, 2 months from now, in 2 months of investigating, no real credible evidence has been brought forth that there's true widespread tampering, do you think Trump should step down? Or do you think Trump should somehow hold his ground and refuse to step down?
No, he should step down. Absolutely. If there is, I want credible evidence to be brought to light. My wish is that if any of this is true, get it out in the open.
Yep.
Get it, show people it,
and
say, look, this is what we're witnessing, and this is why we're arguing with it. That's all I want.
Yeah.
January 20th is a long time away still. If they can't come up with anything to show the American people in that time, when you're sitting in the highest office and have the best security there is and the best people around you that there possibly is to investigate this and to get it exposed and out in the open, if you can't have a clear answer by January 20th, get out, step down, you're done.
Total speculative here. In a world where they have no credible evidence by January 20th, what's your prediction about what Trump will do?
My prediction would be the same as my hope, that he would be a fair loser and say, look, you won it. Congratulate Joe Biden, hand over the presidency peacefully, and go down as a former president. And that
won't happen. We'll see who's right.
Yeah.
My predictions will throw a giant fit. He might do something like drastic, like, stage a military coup and surround the White House with tanks to take over the country, or he might do something childish and just not show up at the inauguration ceremony and spend the rest of his life campaigning on Twitter about how he was wrong. But my prediction is that he won't handle it gracefully. So
I hope that's not true, but we can only wait and see. And cool. So I put it all in God's hands, and that's my beginning and my end all, is that it would be in God's hands.
Well, this has been quite interesting, right? So some major takeaways for me. One is that we share more values than I expected. It does seem that a lot of the ways that we disagree or come to different conclusions trace back to things that neither of us can actually know concretely. Just our impression, our gut feeling of how the world works, right? Is where our different outcomes comes from, which is interesting. I assumed kind of different outcomes was because of different values. So, but it might be same values, different assumptions about how the world works that leads to this.
Right.
And I think, again, there's a huge difference in the news we consume. It's mind-boggling to me, a lot of things that you've said, because I've never seen anything to support any of those. But I can totally imagine if Facebook algorithm fed me what it fed you, I might have the same views, right? So that is concerning.
That would mean that Facebook is too powerful. I would think that if it can shape two people that have mostly the same values, if it can shape those two people's views totally different, then who's really in charge and who's powerful?
Well, think about it this way, right? You and I have similar values. You and I had a similar opinion about Trump in 2016. But I would say mostly because you probably follow a lot of conservative Christian Facebook pages and Facebook friends. And I follow a lot of left-wing liberal progressive Facebook pages. The biggest difference between us, and that is probably a big part of what spun the difference between us today. Right at a similar place. Now, there's still some differences in our perceptions and worldviews, even in 2016, but they were very minor. But here we are in 2020, vastly different outcomes. The difference is our Facebook feed.
It would be interesting to see how this conversation would go 100 years ago, before we had internet, TV, Facebook, even radio, before we had any of that, and it was just pure, old West settler kind of stuff and feel. How would our opinions be then? It's interesting to think about that how much media, social media, radio, talk, news, TV, how it all plays a role in our lives and can actually shape us and mold us,
Cool. Well, thanks for doing this, man. It wasn't quite as difficult as I expected. I expected to be a lot more painful moments than there was. And again, that's a lesson for everyone, right? These things aren't as bad as you think. When you really just get down and have the conversation, you'd be surprised.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for doing this. And I had a great time, and I look forward to doing one on racism too, because there's a lot of things that can go along with that. And I'm sure that I have a lot of viewpoints that would be totally different from most of my conservative friends when it comes to that aspect.
And that conversation will be easier because we'll probably agree on 99% of
it. Oh, absolutely.
Much easier. Cool. Well, thank you so much, man. I will talk to you later.
All right. Have a good one.
Bye.